Welcome, everyone. My name is Stacy Rutland. I am founder of Income Movement, and we are so pleased to have everyone join us this evening for this important panel conversation that we're going to talk about why cash matters and really reimagining what our economy and the social safety net might look like if we start thinking about cash as the way we want to support and lift up our most vulnerable members of our communities. So tonight, this event is the beginning and inaugural event of a three-part series on guaranteed income. Very excited to have the panelists that are here with us today. And we will, towards the end of this conversation, we'll remind you guys of what the next two series, the topics of them, the panelists that will be involved, and give you some links to those in case you're interested in participating in those as well. We want to thank our partner organizations today who have helped make this event series possible. Mayors for Guaranteed Income and Inherent Good, the Inherent Good documentary film team. Both the producers, directors have all been incredible partners along with Mayors for a Guaranteed Income in making these events happen and really supporting us all along the way. So I'd love to talk a little bit about how Crowdcast works. This might be the first time for some of you that have experienced an event via this piece of software. So for the most part, it runs pretty similarly to Zoom and some of the other standard tools, but just so that we can cover the basics. You'll see that down at the bottom, there's some buttons. One says ask a question. That'll be the location where you're gonna want to ask a question for the panelists. As we go through the conversation, of course, over on the right-hand side is a chat stream that is a great place to have conversations, comment, give accolades, anything that you want to respond to that's happening in the conversation. But if you have a specific question that you want to follow up with, have the host follow up with, drop it in the ask a question section, and we'll make sure that if we have the time, we'll get to as many of those questions at the end of the conversation as possible. So a few of the, and in that chat will also be links to more information about the panelists or topics that are being covered, articles that might be referenced or reports, just so that you can click on those and peruse those after the conversation at your leisure. So definitely you'll see a lot of different resources coming your way as the conversation continues. So tonight we have the pleasure of talking with a wide variety of panelists. And at the beginning of this conversation, I'm going to have a one-on-one conversation with former Mayor Michael Tubbs. And so I'm going to invite him to join me on screen right now. There he is. Hey, Mayor Tubbs, how are you doing?
I am so relieved that I did the tech correctly. So I'm great. How are you?
I'm doing great. So for those of you who maybe haven't had the pleasure of seeing and listening to Mayor Tubbs or in the past, he's the former mayor of Stockton. He's also the founder of Mayors for Guaranteed Income. And he's responsible for the Stockton Economic Empowerment Demonstration, which was a demonstration, some people call them pilots, if that's kind of the more familiar vernacular that you use in your communities, but it's a guaranteed income demonstration that ran for what ended up being 2 years in Stockton. And so we really thought he would be a great person to set the stage for this important topic of why cash matters, why we want to reimagine and rethink how we shape the economy and how we support and change our social safety net to make sure that we are giving the dignity that we should be giving to all of our community members. So welcome, Mayor Tubbs. So good to have you here. Is there anything that I left out about who you are or what you're doing that you want to include?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm a father to an amazing 18-month-old son and another one, we don't know baby's gender yet, on the way in August, and a partner to an amazing wife, Anna.
Wonderful. And Anna's amazing. If you all want to go and look up Anna, you should, because there's great stuff coming out of the whole household. So there's a couple of core questions that I wanted to ask you to set the stage. So the first is, when we, and many people that are going to be on this panel are, as along with you, are really fighting for guaranteed income. And a lot of the time in that, we talk about this idea that there's dignity in cash. And I'd love to understand a little bit more what the research results from the first year of SEED tells us about the impact and role of cash, and what that has, kind of impact on community members when it comes to dignity.
Yeah, and feel free, if I don't answer your question, to re-ask it, because sometimes I just start talking, I just answer.
Okay.
Like, say you answer what you want to answer, but I want to answer your question. No, so first, thank you for your leadership, the leadership of your team, and the leadership of all the people who are on this call with us, from the elected officials like the Congresswoman and the state senator, to philanthropists like Ms. Huff, to advocates and organizers like Madeline, and to all you all, filmmakers, etc. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your work, because it's a collective effort, and we're so much closer to the goal than we were just a couple of years ago, just because all of us have stepped up and done what is necessary. And I love the frame around dignity, because that's literally what we're talking about when we talk about the need for a guaranteed income. And we're talking about dignity being in cash, but more importantly, that dignity is inherent to humanity. I can't tell you how many arguments I've been in over the past 4 years around this tired argument about the dignity of work, that people need work for dignity. And I think a guaranteed income, giving people cash, providing an income floor, really illustrates what I know to be true. And that's that dignity is inherent to humanity. And if we actually treated people with dignity, then they would go to work in dignified conditions, like wages that pay, like the rights to organize, like one job being enough to pay for things, etc. And what we've also seen is that our government and our systems actually do provide the dignity of cash to some people. When you think of sort of tax cuts, when you think of sort of the ways in which in every recession, or all the time, basically, anytime there's an economic conversation, the conversation reverts to, how do we give those with more money more money? Because we trust them to have the agency and the ability to use that money in a way that government can. If you think of, like, the whole argument about tax cuts is that if you allow rich people to pay less taxes, they know how to use that money better than government. And what we're saying with a guaranteed income is, let's afford that same dignity, that same benefit of the doubt to folks like you and me, to folks like everyone else, and understand that we can live in a society where everyone has a floor, which doesn't mean everyone has luxury, but it does mean no one should live in scarcity, no one should live in poverty, no one should live in lack. And that's not an idealistic argument. That's an argument based on the reality of the resources and the wealth that we have as a society, but also an understanding of what it takes to be human, which at a baseline level is the ability to have shelter, the ability to eat, the ability to have lives, but more importantly, the ability to own some of your time, so you're able to be a parent, so you're able to be a partner, so you're able to be a neighbor.
That's right. I think in a conversation with Aisha Nyandoro, who has been leading the Magnolia Mothers Trust, she's talked about this idea of guaranteed income as bandwidth. This is providing space and time for people to do the things that have the most importance and highest impact on families, on neighborhoods, communities, and that the ripple effect of providing bandwidth is such a important. It really struck home when she talked about it in that context.
Well, I think it's bandwidth, but particularly because even folks, no matter what political persuasion, we have a weird relationship in this country with economic insecurity, and part of it is we think the problem is with people, and that's why the solutions that have been coming forward have been those focused on deficits in people. Like, people need this, people need that, they need to learn this, they don't know how to do this, etc. When we come at it, and I think guaranteed income comes at it like Dr. King did, the issue isn't with people. Right. The issue is with policies and systems and structure. And if you give people what they need, the vast majority of people are going to make the right decisions. People aren't struggling in this economy because they're deficient. People aren't struggling in the economy because they don't know how. People are struggling in this economy because they don't have enough money. And I think to Aisha's point, it is about bandwidth. In Stockton, we saw employment part-time and from part-time to full-time employment double because people had the bandwidth to take a day off and interview for a job. People had the bandwidth to buy interview clothes. People had the bandwidth to think beyond the next hour or the next meal. And that is one of the reasons why, as you can tell, I'm so fired up and so passionate about this concept and about this policy.
What are some other things that have come out of the first year's findings with SEED that get at, you know, the power of direct cash?
Well, the biggest one for me was in both the quantitative and the qualitative research, it talks about how people, like literally government is formed to allow people to be parents, partners, and neighbors. And the guaranteed income pilot in Stockton over 2 years showed that something as small as $500 allowed people to show up as better parents, as better partners, and as better community members. What's not to love about that? I think the health impacts, particularly in this health pandemic, can't be overstated. The fact that those who receive the guaranteed income had their depression levels lowered on the Kessler scale, comparable to clinical trials of Prozac, is significant because so much of the stress and anxiety and depression we see, sure, there's a chemical component, but oftentimes it is triggered by economic insecurity. And for me, that just, it's like, wow, we're missing out on so much. And then given the COVID times we live in, the fact that some people literally said in their interviews, they were able to stay home, even with COVID, and listen to doctor's orders because they knew they had $500 coming in. If they did not have that $500, then they would have went to work and affected people, not because they're bad people, but because they have bills that come every month. And when you don't have paid time off, when you don't have sick leave, taking 2 weeks to shelter in place means being behind on rent, means maybe skipping a couple meals, means not being able to pay the childcare, et cetera.
So I want to just reiterate, because I think there's, you know, some of what you talked about is just so critical, that what you saw, you know, what your demonstration helped illustrate was that actually, you know, there's the argument that when you give cash to people, it makes them lazy, it makes them less likely to work. And you saw the opposite. You saw people going from part-time to full-time in greater numbers than the control group. You saw people who also, whose mental health had the same effects as a Prozac clinical trial. Like when you see that those kinds of things happen at that small level, do you have ideas about what, you know, what that impact would be Stockton-wide or California-wide, a vision of that?
Yeah, I think at the simplest level, it's a vision of what communities look like where everyone's where there's not economic insecurity, where there's not turnover. It's safer communities. It's kids who are performing better in school. It's families that are healthier because they're able to buy food and eat regularly. It's folks having the ability, I think someone in the chat, and I agreed with that, the ability to say no, that I don't have to take this terrible job. I don't have to do this 4-hour Uber shift after working 8 hours. I could stay home and breathe. And I think someone else said not be a workaholic robot, but to be human. But also we think of creativity, if we think of sort of the amount of people who would pursue more artistic and cultural things if they had just a little bit of an income floor to take that risk. I think of sort of the small businesses that could start if folks just had a little bit of money to invest in themselves, because everyone doesn't have millionaire parents to invest in them. Like some of my friends did, who are very successful now, right? Or to even take that risk. I think it looks like sort of honoring the work that women do as caregivers, as folks who are doing all this domestic labor, all this child rearing work, oftentimes having, as we've seen during COVID, having to remove themselves from the workforce. It seems like honoring them and their contribution. It looks like the society we all tweet about, we all Facebook about, we all next door about in terms of things we complain about. It looks like a society that begins to answer many of those questions. And again, I'm not saying that the guaranteed income is going to solve all issues, but I am, and I want to be very clear, I am saying that a guaranteed income solves the important issue of economic insecurity, it makes it easier to solve the other problems we have to solve as a society.
Well, I can't think of a better place to start to invite other panelists to join this conversation. Thank you so much, Mayor Tubbs, for being able to make some time to share the amazing work and results of the work that you guys have been doing with the Stockton demonstration, and looking forward to what comes next.
And let me say one more thing. I know I'm over time, but I wanted to give a special shout out to the State Senator Cortese. He's been leading, particularly around thinking about a state policy for guaranteed income for foster youth. I know he's going to talk about it, but I want him to know that I appreciate his work and his leadership, particularly in the policy space. I'm looking forward to supporting whatever bill the Congresswoman puts out in Congress in terms of moving this forward from pilots to policy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Have a wonderful evening. So that was fantastic. I could listen to Mayor Tubbs all day long. So really glad that he was able to join us for the short time that he had kind of a window. Such an important laying of the groundwork. What I want to do now is start to invite the other panelists, and the first person that I'm going to invite, who's here, lovely woman beside me, one of my favorite people, is Madeline Neighly, and she is Director of Guaranteed Income and Economic Security Project. She is also the co-chair of the Guaranteed Income Community of Practice, so she can talk a little bit about what those things are as part of the conversation. She's also on the East Coast, so I wanted to say a big thank you for, at 9 o'clock at night, bringing together her brain power to actually host and be part of this conversation. So thank you so much, Madeline, for being here. Can you hear me? Okay. Oh, no, your mic is, you were on earlier. Let's see. Oh, here, hold on. I might be able to turn you on. Why is your mic not going on? That's so strange. So for some reason, Madeline's mic is not going on. I don't know if you need to leave to come back. Let's go ahead and try that real quick. So Madeline's gonna leave and then she's gonna come back, which means I need to invite her. So it'll take just a moment, but we wanna make sure that, that she has a chance. I'm also gonna bring in, so just a moment, everybody. This is where tech is amazing, and also it can be painful sometimes. All right, let me see if I can find her in community. There she is. All right, I'm gonna invite her and we'll see if her mic is able to work now. Everything takes a couple of minutes. Definitely, if you have any questions, if you haven't had a chance to get those in the questions, ask a question piece from the conversation with Mayor Tubbs. Definitely include those.
Hi, is it working now?
Yay!
Yay! I'm so sorry, everyone. I promise I was really clicking the microphone. I guess we just learned that you should never mute me and I should have free reign all the time to talk. So thank you so much for the warm introduction, Stacey. And I just want to say that I'm so thrilled to be here and I would happily meet you any 9 o'clock anywhere to talk guaranteed income. So I'm gonna bring on the rest of the panelists for this great panel so we can get moving. So first I would like to invite Congresswoman Sara Jacobs from California's 53rd District to join us. And Congresswoman Jacobs is supporting a guaranteed income demonstration that includes National City and San Diego in Southern California. And I look forward to learning more. Next up, Adam Roseman, who is the co-founder and CEO of Steady, an organization that has given more than $2 million in cash grants to its members. during COVID and has tracked the longer term impact. Said he's also one of the distribution partners for many of the pilots that are underway across the country. So we'll get to learn more from him. Gisele Huff, who is the founder for the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity and a lead visionary for the Santa Clara County Young Adults Transitioning Out of Foster Care Guaranteed Income Pilot that we're going to learn more about. Gisele, I really hope you're not having the same trouble I did and can join us. Okay, I'm going to let Stacy handle that behind the scenes. Oh, no, there you are. Hello. So welcome to
Well, I'm seeing you.
What's that? You don't see us? We can
No.
see you.
You can see me, but I can't see you.
I can, and your lipstick is spot on. It matches your coat perfectly.
Yes.
I think you look amazing.
So I'm on a thing that says Gisele Huff. Welcome to Gisele Huff's profile.
I'm gonna let Stacy text you how to get out of there. I think you might have opened up a little side project. Yay, technology. So while Gisele is working on that, I want to introduce our last panelist, California State Senator Dave Cortese, who is now gone again. Okay. I love tech. He really was, and he's done such great work, and I really hope he is able to join again so we can talk about the adults transitioning out of foster care, the transitional age youth, and what he's doing on the state level now, learning from that. So let's start by talking about what brought you to this. Hi, welcome back, Senator Cortese. We were just talking about how great your work has been and how much we were hoping you would be able to join us. So it's lovely to see you. And I just want to put a plug for the bills that you're working on. So I'm not sure of everyone's timeline right now. Is anyone going to have to jump early, or do I have you all for the full half hour? Great.
All good, all good.
Excellent. Okay, so my first question to you would be for everyone to talk about what brought you to this work. Kind of how did you become invested in the idea of cash, and personal stories, anything. And I would love to start with you, Senator Cortese.
Well, Gisele Huff brought me to this work. It's as simple as that. And we have a mutual friend. He's a professional. He's a friend, I think, is fair to say, but also a professional acquaintance who, just does great work in a number of different spaces around connecting people, and more on the public relations side, Rick Keating. And he said to me one day, I really want you to meet Gisele Huff, and she's working on this, terrific stuff, and you need to talk to her. So that it led to us getting together for a brief meeting in San Francisco at a time when I was up there doing regional government meetings. I'm normally in the South Bay, or now Sacramento, of course. But let me just say, I think the deeper part of the question very quickly is this. I knew enough about UBI to say no quickly if I really wanted to. And I think, unfortunately, for the longest time up until most recently, that's been the case with a lot of people. It's like, oh yeah, I know what that is. No, that's probably for somebody else. And I think we've really, all of us, everyone involved with this work has really shifted the perception. Gisele's in my life is one of those people who's done a tremendous job of that. But she had, aspirations of Santa Clara County, the county where I was on the Board of Supervisors at the time, taking on guaranteed income instead of, the old stale conservative approaches to safety net work. And we talked about let's launch a pilot around foster youth in the county that, really understands that work. And let's see if we can get it done. And we did. And now, for a year, 72 transition age foster youth have been in a program where they're receiving $1,000 a month. And of course, now she has inspired me to take this statewide. And, we just got out of our first committee hearing yesterday. with our Senate bill on universal basic income for all transition age foster youth in California. And I was pleasantly surprised and affirmed by how smoothly that moved through the committee process. So there's some money involved. We'll have to get that straightened out, hopefully with the governor. But my experience all goes back to that first meeting with Ms. Huff.
Well, that's excellent. And I think then begs the question, Gisele, what brought you to CASH, to understanding that this was such an important intervention?
So I founded the Gerald Huff Fund for Humanity in memory of my son, who was an ardent supporter of UBI, and he came to it because of the challenges of technological unemployment. He was a principal software engineer for the Model 3 Tesla, and he was in tech for a long, long time, and he was very worried about what that would mean to the economy, to our society, and to the world when the robots would, take over, and how we would manage the transition. And he thought UBI was the answer to that, and then we had to give people a floor under which no one could fall. And he was also philosophically really taken with the idea, the humanity, the kinds of things that Mayor Tubbs was saying. I want to interrupt myself to thank Dave for putting so much credit on me when this was all his doing, and he did an incredible job of getting that through the bureaucracy of the Santa Clara County, and getting it through in less than a year. I mean, I was astounded. So I just wanted to give credit where credit was due. So for me, not only is it about giving a floor and making some arrangements for the forthcoming, upheaval that the fourth industrial revolution is going to bring. But it's also about really delving into what it means to be a human being. And if you don't have control, agency, then you're a slave. You're not a human being. You're a person without a say in the way you live your life, however that life might be, as long as you don't hurt others. So for me, the idea that it's that giving people cash gives them the freedom to actually live their lives as they see fit is the overarching idea of UBI.
Yeah. And so, Adam, I know that you started steady, hearing Gisele, obviously, this idea that technological advances can have an upheaval on workers' lives, but workers have long been struggling, and the fissuring of the workplace and some of the modern concerns have long been there, and folks have been struggling. So can you talk a bit about steady and how that links into guaranteed income?
Yeah, so to me, it was all about data, right? And data through a technology platform. And I started Steady about 4 years ago to focus on building out a collaborative data platform where workers could contribute their data, specifically their financial data, by linking their financial accounts to our platform, so that we could use that data to provide the community with better guidance based on other people and seeing what they're able to do in terms of earning, right? So to lift people's income. In 2019, we were very pleased to enter our first partnership with a California-based NGO called the Workers Lab, to look at those members in our community where we saw, based on their account data, income shock, right, pre-pandemic. We distributed about $500,000 to 500 workers and worked with the Workers Lab to measure the impact of those funds, right? And we had the benefit of having large control groups because we have so many others who didn't receive the funds who were on our platform. And what we saw was unbelievable outperformance from the standpoint of earned income from those individuals in the out months, right? So then the pandemic hit. Our data set had fortunately advanced pretty dramatically, where we were servicing nearly 3 million workers, predominantly hourly engaged across the US, about 300,000 in California. And we were able to quickly engage with the Workers Lab again and start a scaled cash grant program in excess of $3 million that we were able to give. And we saw the same thing during the pandemic. And so, what we decided at that point in time was, we really needed to frame our view of income a little bit differently, right? We set out to lift people's income, but with the thought that that income was all going to be, right? Given that view into those 3 million workers and the view into jobs that we have, right, as a platform that curates work based on what gives someone the highest opportunity for income guidance based on their skill set, is what we saw during the pandemic with a substantial increase in underemployment and unemployment is we just don't believe that there's going to be enough earned wage opportunity for people to be able to generate livable wages anymore. And hence, our view of income became much broader. To include things like universal basic income and include things like unemployment insurance in areas specifically for new workers like PUA and MUC that have come about during this period. And so what we decided at that point was to utilize our tech, which provides for automation and the ability to measure impact, to support all of those wonderful people like those who I have the pleasure of being on this phone call with today, and Merritt Tubbs and MGI and Andrew Yang, to endeavor on their mission by providing them with a unified data set and the ability to really measure impact and automate a process that historically was cumbersome.
Thank you. And finally, Congresswoman Jacobs, I know that you have launched that there will be demonstrations in National City and San Diego. What brought you to the work? How did you connect to this idea?
Well, thank you for the question, and thank you so much for having me. It's so great to hear everyone's stories. So my background is really in foreign policy and international development. I worked for the UN and the State Department and at UNICEF in their innovation unit, and I was doing a lot of work around how we can better do development around the world. And then I moved back home. I started running for office, and I realized that so many of the challenges I was addressing overseas were actually right here in my own backyard. That in San Diego County, prior to the pandemic, we had about 40% of our kids living in families experiencing poverty. And San Diego County is a pretty wealthy county in a pretty wealthy state. And so that to me was really unacceptable. And I thought there were a lot of lessons that we could learn about how we were doing this kind of poverty reduction work overseas. And so I founded San Diego for Every Child, which is an initiative to end childhood poverty in San Diego County, really with the idea of bringing together all the different stakeholders, all the different partners, and figuring out how we could reimagine the way that we address poverty, and in particular, childhood poverty and the experience of childhood poverty. And so through that work, working with Jewish Family Service and other nonprofit groups in San Diego, we realized that we had this opportunity to not only reimagine in general how everyone addresses poverty, but really how the nonprofit sector is doing their service delivery and start to try and innovate and pilot new ways. And so that's where what we call resilient communities for every child, the guaranteed income demonstration program that we'll be running in San Diego and national cities was born. And we're just getting started, but I'm really excited to see what we can learn and how we can build off of all of the great work that's been done, and in particular look at how this guaranteed income can affect children and child development.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And, as most of you know, under the new American Rescue Plan, the child tax credit at the federal level has been extended and expanded so that it now covers kids where there aren't earned wages from their parents, which is something that hadn't happened before. So previously, people weren't able to get the full credit if they didn't earn enough money, which is also a concern with the earned income tax credit. So because of the current pandemic, for a year, the child tax credit's been expanded, and families that even don't have a minimum earning will be getting that tax credit. So really interesting. We also have these other experiments happening at the same time that we will be learning from. And I know that there's a lot of interest already to make sure that this is not a one-off deal. So, the seed results are amazing and strike such a chord because it's both the data and the stories, right? We get at people's hearts and minds. And we have decades, if not centuries, of really problematic ideas of who is impoverished and why, and what causes these things. That leads people to really question the viability of just giving cash, right? So there's a lot of ideas around what the cash is going to be spent on, decision making, all the things that Mayor Tubbs and Stacey were talking about before. I don't want to rehash all of the stereotypes and negative ideas that are out there, but I do want to hear some framing ideas from you all. How do we, while not reifying these ideas and reiterating them, how do we respond to them? And what, from your different vantage points, are the most important things for all of these demonstrations and all of our work to be doing? Is it the narrative and storytelling? Is it the data? Is it weaving it all together? Is it highlighting the impact on children? As somebody who's in this field, I just want to learn from you all as to what are our most effective talking points? What do we need to do to build out this movement? I'm going to open the floor.
All right, well, I guess I spend more time than most of you talking to people who disagree with these kinds of programs. So I'll take the first stab at this. But, I find in my experience that focusing on children is very helpful. We know that to help children, you're really helping the parents, right? Like, we know that, but it's much easier to get buy-in for a kid that no one can think it's their fault, right? No one can talk about the life choices they made about a 5-year-old. And so that to me helps focus some of the conversation around what really needs to happen and not all of these preconceptions of what poverty looks like and why people experience poverty. I think something that is really important, especially now as we're coming out of this pandemic and the economic crisis, is that these programs actually deliver dollars directly into the local economy. We saw it with the stimulus checks from the CARES Act and the American Rescue Plan. Part of this is it's not just about the people who are getting the money, but actually how they're spending it, much of which is going directly back into circulation in the local economy. So it is also a stimulus for everyone, and for small business owners, and for all these different groups of people who we know are going to need help as we rebuild out of this crisis. And then lastly, I think a lot of the research that has come out is really helpful to say, like, this money was spent on things that we all think are important, that people do know what they need for their own lives, that this enables them to actually do the training, to go to the job interviews, to get the better jobs, to buy more nutritious food for themselves and their kids. And having those data points is actually really helpful when we're talking to people, especially at least in Washington, where people are still very caught up in the conversation in the 90s and welfare reform and this whole idea of who experiences poverty.
Thank you so much. Adam?
Yeah, I was just going to say, from my perspective, it's scale and it's providing for a unified data set, right? So that the other narratives can be shot down. I'm going to call out the University of Chicago, who came out with a report shortly after supplemental unemployment insurance was put in place, right, in April, May of last year, talking about the disincentive that was going to be providing to send people back to work, that people wouldn't be going back to work, right? We looked across our 3 million worker population, and we saw the exact opposite. We saw those that were receiving their unemployment early were getting back on their feet. We saw those that weren't, that were waiting 2, 3, 4, 6 months, who unfortunately, by the way, very strong correlation between having a lower income base prior to the pandemic and taking longer to receive your benefits, just due to a lack of ability to get through the funnel quickly, just due to the different types of unemployment insurance that exist, specifically with PUA and MUC. But it's the narrative. You have to shoot down the narrative, and to do that, you have to drive scale, and it has to be inclusive and broad-based. And I think with what MGI is doing right now with Mayors for Guaranteed Income, 41 mayors, 41 cities, right? You unify that data, you come out of that with a backbone that talks about the success in 41 cities, large-scale cities. That's going to defeat any narrative, right? Especially a narrative that doesn't have data sitting behind.
Let's hope so. So I really love the pilot that Gisele and Senator Cortese worked on together with transition age foster youth. And I've been pitching that to states that are interested in getting in the game. Just FYI, Senator Cortese, I'm sending folks from Massachusetts and Washington to talk to you, given your expertise. One of the reasons I think it's so valuable and important is because this is a community for which the state has already taken an economic interest and an economic responsibility for. And we all know the dangers of transition age youth, right? We know that not having the stability or familial wealth to carry you through that tumultuous time is so destabilizing that, I always forget if it's 70 or 80% of former foster youth end up with a criminal record. So I just think that that's such an amazing way to link together so much of this. It's focused on children. It's focused on a population for whom the state already has an obligation to. But I'd love to hear from you, Senator Cortese. You said in the past you knew enough about UBI to say no to it. What were the effective, besides Gisele just being an amazing advocate, what were the effective arguments to get you on board, and how are you using those out in the field? Oh, I think you're still on mute. There we go.
Fortunately, just to be clear, fortunately, I never actually did say no, but I think I probably had, enough of a default, to perhaps say that, it's, I won't even get into the reasons why, but that's not important anymore. And so to answer your question, I do want to go back to the Gisele conversation for a moment, because it's part of the answer to the question. It's a two-part answer for me. And some of it's already been said by the other panelists, frankly, in different ways, I think. But, we didn't just agree on relationship or because somebody nice introduced us or because it was, a nice lunch menu that day. It was because when I pushed back a little bit and said, why, she challenged me and she said that, the safety net structure that we have built now came from a conservative ideology. It came from an ideology that's actually has intersectionality with a lot of other things that we probably didn't go into during that particular meeting, but it struck me immediately that I see the connection between, sort of a white privileged, old style conservative board of supervisors pre-1968 in my own county that said, we know best what you welfare moms need. And these were quotes that you could read in the paper back in 1968. We know best, and we're going to prescribe what you need. You need housing, or you need this, or you need that. Any number of the things that we all need on Maslow's hierarchy, right? But they said, we're going to choose for you. And she challenged me and she said, that's not right. And that was the icebreaker for me. That was the epiphany for me to say, I get it. I get it that you've got to give people, you don't dominate people out of poverty. You give people the freedom to get out of poverty. If you're there to rescue them, they're going to turn you away. If you're there to be part of their empowerment, they're going to buy into it. I had to learn that much working with high-risk youth, working with people in poverty. So and I knew, because I'm old enough to know, that when I was a kid, and that goes back to the late 50s and early 60s, that both political parties and both presidents, even Eisenhower and Kennedy, were saying that by now we would have eradicated poverty, right? So something failed. And really what was pointed out to me was, if you want to keep being prescriptive, if you want to keep doing that ideology, expect more failure, expect poverty to continue, because that's what we've gotten for the last 50, 60 years. Back to this model, this particular program that we're doing within the larger movement of cash or UBI is you have the data. And these are not just kids that the counties and the state have already taken on responsibility for. These are the children of the state. These are the children of the county. And so we don't have to go out to parents and families of non-foster youth and say, hey, we're going to try this experiment. Let's give them $1,000 as they're transitioning out of your household. And then let's go back and try to figure out, all the data. We have the data. We have the data as to what they've been up against up to that point. We know they're right up against a financial cliff because they're transitioning, and so we can see what happens now precisely with this empowerment and this freedom that we're granting them. So I think the beauty of this, much like combining a number of cities, is you have a sample with real data that to some degree is going to be irrefutable. I think it's not going to be anecdotal. It's going to be, look, if you look at our foster population in this county or in this state for the last 5 years, here's what we got doing it the old way. If you look at it over the next 3 years, here's what we got doing it this way. And I'm absolutely convinced that the outcomes are going to change, literally change the way that we deal with what we used to call a welfare system.
Thank you. So we have a question. It was submitted anonymously, but it sounds like such a plant. I promise it wasn't. The question is, how can Californians help support these efforts that Senator Cortese and Congresswoman Jacobs are working on? I promise I did not write that question. It literally got submitted. But we do have a captive audience here. So how can the Californians on the phone support your work?
Let me just say quickly, I mean, I want the Congresswoman has got a whole different political environment to deal with, as she alluded to. We get the pushback too from people, or just, the silence is deafening sometimes, right? You aren't getting people to come on board with something that we believe is very compelling. But the bottom line is, in our case, the bill just came out of its first committee hearing in the state Senate. It's going to appropriations next. The Appropriations Committee is going to make a determination as to whether it has viability going forward. We were astute enough, if I could say so, to put forward simultaneously a budget request in a separate document that goes to Senate Budget Committee, that will eventually go to the Assembly Budget Committee, but it goes to the governor's office in terms of negotiation as well. So write your senator, write your assembly member. This is not to be undervalued or understated, the importance of it. Let them know this is important. Give them the cover, those that are wobbly, to let them know this is something you believe in. This is something your neighbors believe in. And frankly, let the governor's office know. There are a few people in government operations in the governor's office that are going to make a decision as to where to put the California surplus in terms of investment this year. And they need to hear from you as well.
And for us at the federal level, as Madeline noted, in the American Rescue Plan, Congress passed expansion of the child tax credit that estimates say will cut childhood poverty in this country in half over the next year, but it's only for the next year. And so Congress is now working on the American Jobs Plan, which has two components, the infrastructure and then the care economy, or social infrastructure, as we like to call it. A big fight right now is making sure that the American Jobs Plan includes a permanent expansion of the child tax credit, that this isn't just a one-year thing, that actually in the child tax credit, or in the American Jobs Plan, we are permanently working to expand the child tax credit and go beyond that, right? The child tax credit will get us to cutting in half childhood poverty in this country. But there's still about 5 million kids who will be living in poverty. And so thinking about what more we need to do and what's the next step beyond that permanence. But really getting that permanence is the most important. And then my colleague Erin has put in the chat more information on the San Diego for Every Child and resilient communities for every child. And we'd love to have you get involved. Even if you're in California that has a very progressive state legislature and governor and members of Congress, we still have a lot of reticence from folks on the price tag of the child tax credit permanence. So call your members, call your senators. If you don't live in California, even better, because we got more senators that we need to get on board. But it's really going to take a big push from the outside to everyone to get this child tax credit to be permanent.
Excellent.
If I may, just so I don't get in really big trouble with one of my close colleagues in the assembly in the other house, Assembly Member Evan Lowe has actually a broader UBI. He's very involved with Andrew Yang's movement, brought forward a bill. I don't know where it's at in the committee process, but Andrea from my office will post in the chat room what you can do to connect with that bill and with his efforts as well. Thank you.
Excellent. Yes. And I will say I've been working with the economist Derek Hamilton, and we think we have a plan to cut poverty completely. So you will be hearing from us. I mean, it costs money, but we've got money. We just need the will, right? So we have another question from the audience. And the question is, how has the media and local communities responded to pilots, which I feel are two very different questions. Gisele, would you like to talk about how the community responded to the Santa Clara pilot?
No, I'm not in a position to give you that information. Dave probably is, but it isn't complete. It hasn't even been a year yet, so the research isn't in. The media certainly loves the pilots. It's gotten, a lot of play, and Michael Tubbs is an incredible, champion of it. But I just wanted to insert something here as I'm listening to this conversation, and I look at the condition that this country is in, and the fact that many of our children are committing suicide, and they're getting involved in these, in drugs early on. I mean, we're not in a good place. Our children are not in a good place, and if we actually made UBI a national thing, and every middle schooler realized that they were going to get $1,000 a month for the rest of their lives when they turn 18, think of what that would do to those children, for those children, how they would view their future. For the ones who are underserved, what hope that would give them. The fact that everybody was getting it, no matter how stupid they were, or fat they were, or couldn't answer questions, or weren't popular with the cool kids. Everybody knew when they were in middle school, at that terrible moment in time, that they were going to get $1,000 a month when they were 18. Just think about what that would do. That's what we have to keep our eye on.
Well, Gisele, I do have a nearly preteen daughter, so I will keep that in mind as we move into those terrible years that you've just terrified me about all over again. And so I think we're wrapping up. No one's yelling at me yet, and I'm really enjoying this conversation. So I'm going to keep going until someone tells me we have to stop. We have so much movement on the city level. We have movement on the state level, and we have movement on the federal level in various ways. And as Michael Tubbs said when he was leaving, we got to move from pilot to policy. And this is something that I've been drilling into him. I am so thankful to work closely with them, and I'm a policy advocate. So the pilots are amazing, and they put money into people's pockets right now, and they are insufficient. And without, federal guaranteed income or state dollars behind it, these philanthropically funded pilots will end. How do we make this shift from pilot to policy? We've got great ideas here, and we have a host of different viewpoints. So I would just love a little bit from each of you on how we can make this big step.
The Congresswoman was, spot on when she was talking about it's money, and the cost benefit of that money is critical to our constituents and to growing this beyond pilots. And I didn't touch upon that earlier, and I probably should have. The cost benefit is economic, but it's also the things Gisele was talking about. And those are conjunctive, right? Those are connected, right? The cost of incarceration, the cost of young people, for example, in and out of our systems, perhaps at some point, UBI or some expansion of cash assistance for older adults will keep them in in a better place. But we did a thing that we always simply just called the cost study when we were on the brink of making $1 billion investment in homelessness in Santa Clara County back in 2016, because one member of our board said, I won't vote to put this $1 billion measure on the ballot unless I know that the cost benefit makes sense. Is it going to save us costs on the back end of our county operation? And what this independent study showed was that doing nothing was costing us $85,000 per capita because of the recidivism in all of our systems that was happening and going unchecked. And that as soon as you started putting, and this is prescriptive, this is housing, okay, it's a different topic, but as soon as you started creating that assistance, all of a sudden you drop that cost down by $50,000 per capita. We need, and hopefully that's what the others were talking about in terms of as we get data, I think we're going to be able to demonstrate that this isn't free money or a cost. This is the humanitarian thing to do, the right thing to do, the empowering thing to do, but it's also a business model for government that makes sense. But we need to get there, and then we'll break through.
Like anything, I think there's a couple of pieces to it. So the first is we need a constituency. I hear from people every day. A lot of people are very concerned about the deficit, are very concerned about how much money we're spending on different things. You need a countervailing constituency who's saying this is the right thing to be doing with this money. This is the investments that we need to be making. And your elected leaders need to hear that, and they need to know that if they take this tough decision, this tough vote, that there will be people in their communities who are supporting them and having their back. And right now, I think that they're much more concerned about the people who are worried about the deficit, worried about not having work requirements, or the media picking up on the one person who uses the money wrong, than feeling like they really have a constituency who will have their back and will be able to support them even as they take this tough decision. And then, as Adam and as Dave mentioned, data is really important because for us in Congress, everything gets scored on the budget. But we know that actually every dollar you spend to address childhood poverty, you actually save $7. We know that it's not a question of spending money or status quo, it's spending money or how much all of the other things cost us. But that's not how the budgets get scored right now. So we need more evidence and more research to actually change the framework within which we're evaluating the costs of these bills, so that we can be evaluating doing something or doing nothing, not doing something and this status quo that actually won't stay as it is. And then lastly, I think we also need to be very mindful that many people believe that guaranteed income and basic income is a solution, but a solution to different things. And that means it's slightly different program design. And I think we can't be Pollyannish that even once we have agreement on the need for something like this, that we will all agree on the details. For instance, I think that we need to make sure that guaranteed income is a supplement, not a supplant of the rest of our social safety net. And many people think that actually we can get rid of our social safety net and just do a basic income, and that will save us money and be more efficient. So I think that it's going to take a lot more of these programmatic discussions to really drill down on what this really looks like. And we all say the same words, but do we all mean the same thing? Because, once we get the constituency and once we get the scoring and once we all agree this is something we want to do, there's still going to be a lot of disagreements on what exactly that looks like. And having these pilots and having experts and evidence to be able to use in that conversation will be really important.
I mean,
Adam, there we go.
Yeah, I mean, we've got over 50% of the U.S. working population, right? The statistics are pretty broad. That doesn't have $400 of emergency savings, right? And that was prior to COVID-19, right? There, to the extent that there is from my perspective, a national figurehead. You saw what happened with Andrew Yang during the presidential race, right? He had no brand visibility whatsoever. And you saw what he was able to do in a very short period of time in terms of bringing attention to this movement, right? So if you think about national figureheads who are going to get up and have broad-based recognition and stand up for this, you have a population of the U.S. who it's going to benefit the majority. And if you think about, from my perspective as well, I'm a California native, but I've been in Georgia for the last 3 years, right? Living in Atlanta. And to me, it also comes down to, other topics like voting rights, right? And to the extent that you're ensuring that these individuals are able to get to the polls, and you have figureheads who are standing behind initiatives that are going to provide them with benefit, and you're supporting that with data, right? None of that is easy, don't get me wrong, but those are all relevant topics that are, I think, top of mind right now in the media. And I think they need to be brought together into a unified message.
Well, I believe that we need to do some real digging and exposure of what things are costing us and what horrible results we're getting. I mean, it's not enough just to say, that we have to think ahead, because that's not what human beings do, especially not Congress. Sorry. But we have to reveal constantly just how badly served we are with the programs that we've invented that have just grown and are not doing their job. And the foster kids, which is why it's so easy to sell, because it's so obvious that it's not doing its job. That the whole of it. So we have to get away from programs, and we have to get to direct cash. That's what we have to do in order to get to where we want to go. We have to make it clear that there's we're spending money for nothing. Eventually, people in Congress will get the message.
Well, we have the right crew to bring them the message here. So thank you so much for all the work that Income Movement does, and for, Gisele being the firebrand that's going to get us all there and get us fired up. So I just want to take a moment again and thank this amazing panel. I'm so appreciative to have been in conversation with you. And really, thank you so much for being here and for taking time to think through these big ideas and how we build the world we want. And how we, really trust and build on the freedom and the choice that all people deserve. So thank you so much. And I'm going to hand it back over to Stacey.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Madeline, and everybody that was part of this conversation, and everybody who was able to join as audience members and ask such great questions. This was a really powerful and important conversation. And I love seeing people that are working in so many different domains, so many different areas of a movement for something as important as guaranteed income, basic income. So really appreciate hearing from all of you. And even though we are, I think, Congresswoman Jacobs made a good point that we're using a lot of the same language. Are we really talking the same talk? I think it's an important kind of takeaway. And I think just here tonight, it feels like everyone here is talking the same talk. So I'm really glad to be able to be inspired by all of you. The last piece I want to say really is just for the audience and also for the panelists to invite you. This is the first event on a 3-part series. So next week on the 29th, we'll have the next conversation that's entitled Economic Justice in the 21st Century, the Intersectionality of Race, Class, and Guaranteed Income. And we have a really great set of panelists. Mayor Poe from Gainesville, Florida will be present. Reverend Liz Theo Harris, the co-chair of Poor People's Campaign, as well as former state representative Charles Booker, who looks like he might be making a run in Kentucky again for Senate, as well as others. So we really would love to see you all. I think there's probably a link being dropped in for that next week. And the third event will be Equity, Safety, and Autonomy, Building Economic Systems to Support Women. And certainly women and children came up a lot in this conversation tonight. So we'll spend some time on the 5th of May going deeper into that. I forgot to mention that the host on the 29th is Aisha Nyandoro, who has been overseeing the Magnolia Mothers Trust demonstration, which is just a fantastic pilot that really excited to have her part of that. And for the one on the 5th, we have Alma Zalepi, who's going to be hosting that, as well as Mayor Rhodes Conway, Madison, Wisconsin, who's part of Mayors for Guaranteed Income. Representative Rashida Tlaib is going to join us. Sonia Passy, who's the CEO of Free From, which is an organization that fights for women who are in domestic abuse situations, thinking about how to build systems and laws, economic systems and laws to support them. And then also Teresa Funicello, who wrote great, really in the 80s and 90s, kind of helped us rethink how we should be supporting women and children with the book Tyranny of Kindness. So we hope to see you all. Thank you everyone again for joining us tonight. Have a wonderful evening, and we'll see you next time.